Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden economic blueprint that decides just how big a company should get. It's a master plan that shapes everything from your local coffee shop to massive global corporations.
So, have you ever wondered how a behemoth like Amazon can exist in the same world as that tiny, independent bookstore down the street? You might think the answer is all about marketing or customer loyalty, but the real secret is much deeper. It all comes down to their long-term strategy for costs.
To really get this, you've got to put on your CEO hat and think way, way into the future. It's a viewpoint economists call the long run, and it's where the entire game plan for a company's size really takes shape. Now, when economists say the long run, they don't mean 5 years or 10 years. It's not a set amount of time at all. Think of it as a state of pure possibility, a period where nothing is set in stone. You can build a new factory, ditch all your old machines, change everything. It's a time of total flexibility, where a business can cook up its perfect recipe for making things. Okay, let's get practical with a super important choice that every single company has to make. I don't care if you're making cars or mowing lawns, you have to decide what's the right mix of people and machines. So let's picture this. A company lands a contract to clean up a big park. They've got 3 different ways they could tackle the job, 3 different recipes, each with its own mix of human labor and machinery. All right, scenario 1. Let's say workers are pretty cheap, costing $40 each, while machines are $80. You run the numbers and boom, technology 1, the one using lots of people and just 2 machines, is the clear winner. At $560, it's the most cost-effective way to get the job done, hands down. But, of course, the economy never stands still. What happens when wages start to creep up, say to $55? Well, suddenly that old plan isn't the best one anymore. The firm has to adapt. And now technology 2, with a little more balance between workers and machines, becomes the smartest, most efficient choice.
And if wages really spike, climbing all the way to $90, the whole calculation flips on its head. Now, technology 3, which relies heavily on machines, is the cheapest path forward. This shows a fundamental rule of business. As one of your ingredients gets more expensive, you get really, really good at finding ways to use less of it. So, once a company figures out how it wants to produce something, the next huge question is, how big should the operation be? This, my friends, is all about the power of scale. This brings us to a concept you've definitely experienced, even if you didn't know the name for it: economies of scale. It's the simple, powerful idea that bigger can be cheaper. You know when you go to Costco and buy that giant pallet of paper towels? The price per roll is super low, right? That's it. That's the principle. And it works the same way for production. Take this alarm clock factory, a small one. Maybe it costs them $12 to make each clock. A medium-sized one can get that cost down to $8. But a huge factory churning out thousands, they can make each clock for just $4. That is a massive competitive advantage, all thanks to scale. You know, in some industries, this effect is so predictable, it actually has a name. In the chemical industry, engineers use what they call the 6/10 rule. It's basically a rule of thumb that says you can dramatically increase a plant's capacity without a proportional increase in cost. It's like a cheat code for getting bigger more efficiently. Okay, but this brings up a huge question, right? If getting bigger is always cheaper, why doesn't one giant company just take over everything? Why isn't there just one car company or one pizza company? Well, it turns out there's a limit to the magic of getting bigger. It's because every company is searching for its Goldilocks size. Not too big, not too small, but just right. Economists show this with a simple U-shaped curve. On the left side of the U, getting bigger makes you more efficient. That's economies of scale. In the middle, you hit a sweet spot where size doesn't change your costs much. But if you keep growing, you get to the right side of the U, and that's where things start to go wrong. Because eventually, a company can simply get too big. It starts to trip over its own feet. It becomes a tangled mess of bureaucracy and red tape, and surprisingly, the costs per item actually start to go up. Yeah, sometimes this is called the Leviathan effect. The company becomes this giant, clumsy beast. Communication breaks down, decisions take forever, and coordination becomes a nightmare. And that is why the cost curve eventually starts to bend upwards. It's the market's way of punishing companies that get too big for their own good. All right, let's zoom out one last time. We've seen how a single company chooses its methods and its size. So what happens when you put all of these individual decisions together? Well, that's how entire industries get their shape.
The exact shape of that U-curve tells you almost everything you need to know. If the bottom of the U is sharp and narrow, like on the left, it means there's one single perfect size for a company in that industry. So most of the competitors will be roughly that same size. But if the bottom of the curve is wide and flat, like on the right, it means companies of many different sizes can all be efficient and compete with each other.
So think about that. The number of firms in a market, how big they are, whether it's dominated by a few giants or filled with tons of small players, none of that is random. It's a direct result of that invisible underlying cost curve. It's the hidden architecture of the entire market.
And what's really fascinating is that this logic goes way beyond just companies. It even applies to our cities. Cities get better and more efficient as they grow, up to a point. But then they get too big, and you get gridlock traffic and sky-high housing costs. That's just diseconomies of scale, city style. Which brings us to a final, very important thought. Technology is constantly changing the rules of the game. Things like the internet, AI, and new manufacturing techniques are completely reshaping those cost curves right before our eyes. And that leaves us with a critical question for the future. Will we live in a world dominated by a handful of massive giants? Or will new technology create a thriving new ecosystem of small, nimble innovators? The final answer is still being written.